What's up YouTube, welcome to my new in-depth movie series review, and today I'm reviewing the first film in the Spider-Man series, Spider-Man. So basically, I'm going to be reviewing all the Spider-Man films in anticipation for Spider-Man Homecoming. I'm going to be reviewing Spider-Man, Spider-Man 2, Spider-Man 3, The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and of course Spider-Man Homecoming, which looks pretty bad. Spider-Man is directed by Sam Raimi and stars Tobey Maguire, Kirsten Dunst, William Dafoe, and a bunch of other actors. Spider-Man was released in May 2002 and made about $821,708,000 worldwide, making it the third highest grossing movie of 2002, which was actually a really good box office gross for the time. So this film pretty much tells the origins of the character of Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man. So Peter Parker is basically this outcast at school who, occasionally gets bullied, and during a field trip one day, he visits a genetics laboratory in which he gets bit by a radioactive spider, which gives him these, just a bunch of superpowers. Also, Norman Osborn, the father of Peter's friend Harry, is attempting to secure an important military weapon contract. He experiments on himself with these, performance-enhancing chemicals which just make him completely insane. So the beginning of this film is basically Peter Parker becoming Spider-Man. We meet his friend Harry and his love interest Mary Jane. I think Harry is a very good character, and he just comes off as such a great friend to Peter. Mary Jane is also a good addition to this movie, and she just adds a lot to the story. Peter's reactions to his new powers after the field trip is actually really well handled, seeing that he is now, more powerful, just has an overall better physique, and even finds out that he can shoot webs from his wrist, which creates a great fight scene, with his bully Flash Thompson. I just really like that part of his character, that he can shoot webs from his wrist. It's just pretty awesome. And we also see that his Uncle Ben, and his Aunt May, who he's living with, notice a change in his personality. So overall, they absolutely nail the character of Peter Parker. This is definitely, by far the best Peter Parker out of the entire movies, entire Spider-Man movies, and it's the one that I actually care about, He's just really well handled in this film. We get a scene where Uncle Ben talks to Peter about Peter's changes and his future, and oh my god, it's one of the best Spider-Man scenes in the series. And what's especially amazing is this famous quote.
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
So yeah, Peter basically ignores that quote and considers impressing Mary Jane with a car, and he tries to get the money by winning an underground wrestling tournament, in which he does win, but basically the wrestling promoter sort of scams him and just gives him a really low price. And the wrestling promoter ends up getting robbed, and Peter has a chance at stopping the robber, but Peter lets him go as revenge. Little did Peter know that the robber would end up killing his uncle. So yeah, it's just a great setup, and the fact that the robber kills his uncle just adds so much to the movie. Knowing that Peter could have stopped him, but he didn't. And this becomes, a really important scene that's looked back on in the rest of the trilogy, which is just really nice. It kind of makes Peter guilty knowing that he could have had his uncle live if he would have stopped the robber. It's just a really great scene, and it just adds to the character of Spider-Man, really. Obviously, in Spider-Man 3, they knowingly mess around with the scene, but yeah. The thief attempts to escape from Peter, who chases him down, but the thief trips and falls out of a window to his death. So the whole entire thing with Uncle Ben and his death is just done perfectly, and everything about it always just brings so much emotions to me. So after Peter graduates, makes a costume, and starts the entire Spider-Man gimmick, he starts fighting crime. The entire build-up from casual Peter Parker to Spider-Man is very well done. They certainly don't rush it. They really take their time with the build-up, and it ends up paying off when Peter becomes Spider-Man. It's definitely one of my favorite film superhero origins of all time. Then we meet a newspaper chief editor, who is an amazing iconic character. J. Jonah Jameson is such a funny and great character. I just absolutely love his assholeness. It's not unpleasant whatsoever, it's just hilarious. He always gives people such low prices and ripoffs.
I'll give you $200 for all of them.
That seems a little low.
And it's just cool how Peter provides him pictures of Spider-Man, obviously by taking pictures of himself. It's just such a cool job knowing that you take pictures of yourself, even though they think you're taking pictures of someone else. Jonah, of course, doesn't like Spider-Man, and it's neat knowing that Spider-Man, who he hates, is always listening to his critical remarks. It's just so neat knowing that Spider-Man basically has to give pictures to someone who will make him look bad for the money. So yeah, J.K. Simmons fits the role perfectly, and I'm really excited to see him play Commissioner Gordon in Justice League. So Norman learns that Oscorp's board members are planning to sell the company, so he attacks them in his Green Goblin costume at the World Unity Fair, and Peter comes in as Spider-Man and saves Mary Jane, or MJ, from dying. So personally, I think Green Goblin is an okay villain. I like the fact that he's Harry's father, because it plays like a bigger role in the later films, and it adds a lot of drama with Peter, Harry, and Norman. But other than that, he's just kind of like your average typical villain, and he's nowhere near as good as Dr. Octopus in Spider-Man 2. And I also think the costume for Green Goblin is pretty bad. It just looks so, like, cartoonish, like, weird and awkward. And it's just too cheesy and out of place when you compare it to everything else in the film. I think Harry's Goblin costume in Spider-Man 3 just looks much cooler and much better. Spider-Man rescues Mary Jane again from four men trying to mug her, in an alley, and she thanks him by kissing him. And we all know where that goes. Afterwards, Spider-Man and Green Goblin have a fight, and Green Goblin wounds Spider-Man. So at a Thanksgiving dinner with, Aunt May, Mary Jane, Harry Osborn, and Peter, Norman realizes that Peter is Spider-Man, and he also realizes that Peter loves Mary Jane, which he finds as Peter's weakness. So after Green Goblin attacks Aunt May, he later kidnaps and holds Mary Jane and a tram car full of children hostage. And he basically forces Spider-Man to choose who to save, and he drops both the tram car and Mary Jane, but Spider-Man manages to save both Mary Jane and the tram car. Goblin and Spider-Man have a pretty cool final fight in an abandoned building, and the fight is like really brutal, and I just really like how brutal the fight is. Spider-Man manages to overpower Goblin, and Norman reveals himself to Peter, trying to beg for forgiveness, but at the same time he tries to kill Spidey. But it completely backfires and he accidentally kills himself, with his last words to Spider-Man being that he doesn't want Harry to know about, the whole entire thing with him being Green Goblin. Harry believes Spider-Man killed his father, and at his father's funeral, Harry swears vengeance towards Spider-Man. Also, Mary Jane confesses to Peter that she loves him. But Peter knows and reveals that him and Mary Jane can only be friends. I like the final fight, of course, but I'm not a huge fan of the fact that this movie ends, kind of too abruptly, with Mary hinting that she might know that Peter is Spider-Man. I just feel like it ends a little too abruptly, and it's just a little too abrupt, honestly. But overall, I think Spider-Man is a pretty good movie. It was a great start to the Sam Raimi trilogy, and this movie functions really well as a superhero origin story. They just absolutely nail the origins and the character of Peter Parker turning into Spider-Man. First off, Tobey Maguire just 100% nails it as Peter Parker. We care for his character, and we see and understand his struggles. And as far as Spider-Man, he's great as well. I also think Tobey's Spider-Man is just, really good. And, once again, Tobey's Spider-Man comes off as a likable character. And much like Peter, we see and understand his struggles. The whole Peter Parker Spider-Man transitions that we see happen in this movie is just so great to watch. Mary Jane is also a pretty good character, who, Peter grows such a great connection with, and I especially really like the character of Harry Osborn. He's just such a great friend to Peter, and us knowing what his dad is adds a lot to his character. No one will ever beat James Franco as Harry. The entire connection with Peter, MJ, and Harry in this movie is just brilliant. And as I said, Green Goblin, aka Norman, is an okay villain. I don't like his costume, and I think he's a bit typical, but I do like the Norman side much better, and him having two egos like Spider-Man is great. The The plot of this movie is average. As I said, this movie functions well as an origin story, so the plot may not be, like, perfect, but the plot works really well for what this movie is, which is an origin story. The action of this movie is pretty good, and the tone of this movie is done really well for a Spider-Man film. I like seeing some of that light-hearted tone, mixed in with some dark elements. I feel like the MCU movies, a lot of them, not saying all of them, a lot of them, they really lack those dark elements. And what I like about this film so much is that you got that lighthearted element, you got some of that, it's not like entirely dark, but it has dark elements. And I wish a lot of the MCU films would do that, because it seems like they always completely avoid dark elements. They just go really comedic. And you can be comedic, but I mean, you gotta have some dark elements. You can't just always avoid them. So I really like the way Spider-Man, has their tone. The soundtrack of this movie is really good. Hearing Danny Elfman's score just gets you super pumped for some Spider-Man action, and Spider-Man's theme in this film is especially amazing. So yeah, Spider-Man is a pretty good movie, and a great origin story. So I hope you enjoyed my in-depth review of Spider-Man, and in my next in-depth review, I'll be reviewing my favorite Marvel film, Spider-Man 2.